Well, thank you everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. We're going to get started here with our annual State of the County event. I should have double checked, but I think this is at least year 7. So it just seems like people like to hear what's going on, and we really appreciate the administrator and our labor economist, Tom Walsh, just updating us on what's happening. And then I'm also going to give you a little bit of an update on housing and what we're doing in that regard for workforce housing. So, you know, one thing I'd like to say, I guess, before I ask Mark Luberda, our county administrator, to come up, is just that when I'm talking with people that are looking to locate to the county in particular, one thing that I'll mention that they always, you know, kind of raise their eyebrows and they're like, wow, that's amazing, is that our county is, I think, the only county, Mark, that doesn't have debt in the whole out of 72. If not, it's one of maybe 2. So, you know,
we take that slide out.
Oh, we took that slide out? All right, well, sorry about that. But you know, especially if they're coming from Illinois, I think a lot of, you know, where things aren't financially stable in a lot of cases, they find that, you know, I guess reassuring and pretty impressive. But, and I know the county year after year gets awards for their budget and how they manage their finances. So just think they do a great job, and there are a lot of good things that are always happening. So with that, Mark, I'd like to invite you up and update us on what's happening with the county.
Thank you, Dan. That was actually a really nice segue for me based upon how I've sort of laid this out today. Good morning, I'm Mark Luberda. I am the county administrator, and it's my pleasure to be here. I appreciate y'all waking up so early and getting here just to hear me and the Economist. So look, so it's not just the debt that I do have a slide in here on, but there's a lot of good things we've been doing that often when I've done these State of the County, I talk sort of where we're headed. I wanted to start today and talk a little bit about, oh, thank you. Talk a little bit about some of the things we have going and have done. This is going to be talked about at our Finance Committee this week. Last year when I gave this, I talked about being the 19th year in a row that we had received the Government Finance Officers Distinguished Budget Award. And at that point, we were still wondering if we'd get a 20th, because the GFOA had sort of changed their standards for what they were doing. They had added a whole section on strategic planning that you really had to have as a component. And that was something the county really hadn't engaged in prior to last year. But it was part of last year's sort of driving effort, and we did receive the notice that we won. The county board spent a lot of time on strategic planning with some individual whole committee of the wholes just on individual topics. All committee worked on the SWOT analysis. And for the first time, we have published and have on our website a full strategic plan. And the GFOA likes to say, as you can see on the screen there, that it represents a significant achievement by the entity meeting the highest principles of governmental budgeting. And that is important to us, as Derek said, that finances are sort of the foundation of what we do. And so in posting that first strategic plan to our website, one of the parts we liked of their acknowledgement was that 2 of the 3 reviewers in this for this year's award noted that they gave us a rating of outstanding in the strategic goals and strategy portion of the scoring, which was a new category for them. So we think we like where it's leading us. It's helping us sort of focus on some certain things, and we're digging into like housing that Derek will talk about later, and I will a little bit. And much of that stems from the work on that strategic plan that then gave us the budget award. Another area that's worth noting is something called WCEDA, which is the Wisconsin Law Enforcement Accreditation Group. So they promote excellence in law enforcement through participation in a voluntary law enforcement agency accreditation program. The accredited agencies really have to demonstrate that they're really in compliance with all the standards, that they're up to date, and they've covered everything they're supposed to, and that they're sort of doing everything best practices. They have not a lot of room for not meeting the standards. And what I like about these sorts of things is they're very detailed, but it's an independent assessment. You know, I can stand up here every year and tell you how great we're doing, but it's nice to see somebody like GFOA and now WCEDA. The Walworth County in December, they got reaccredited. So the Sheriff's Department, there's only 44 agencies in the state that are accredited, and only 4 of those are counties. There's 72 counties. Only 4 of them are accredited. It doesn't mean that some of them don't do everything as well as us. It means that they haven't made sure, and they can't turn to their citizenry and show that we're meeting high standards based upon independent review. And I think that says something. And for our Sheriff Department to do it, you can see at the bottom of the screen there, I think it's noteworthy because of the size of the Sheriff Department. The county's big. Our budget's about $180 million a year. We have over 800 of the full-time equivalent employees. Sheriff's Department is the second largest in expenditures. 32 million of that is them, almost 33. They're first in the number of employees we have, 217. Almost a quarter of our employees are in the Sheriff's Department. And that is the heaviest user of tax levy. You know, our largest department, Health and Human Services, a lot of their money is state pass-through money, federal money that comes through. We run programs with it. But your property tax dollars, over half of them on the operating side of the budget, goes to support the Sheriff's Department. So that's a department you clearly want to know is operating at the highest standards. The American Public Works Association is a national organization that works with all public works and all agencies at all levels of government. It's a very large, long history of an organization. And they also have an accreditation process. And it's designed to assist the agency in continuous improvement of operations and management. Sort of the same story. It's very detailed, very independent. And it took us about 3 years to work on that, to cover everything. And just after last year's presentation, this time it was in July, that they were accredited. That 3-year effort made them look at every policy and procedure they had. And when they didn't have something they realized they should have, they were able to go back in and fix it. And it wasn't just the director running through doing it. It was really a very delegated process through the whole structure, and so everybody sort of took it personal. And it took them 3 years. They were accredited, and there's only 2 agencies in Wisconsin that have gone through this. And it's been around for a very long time, because the APAW has been around for a long time. I think it's the city of Janesville and Walworth County are the only 2 that are accredited. So when you then look at, sheriff, public works, finance, you know, that comprises a huge section of the core of what we do. You know, your roads and your public safety and management of your tax dollars. Right there, all independently, people have said, organizations have said, the county's doing things well. And Derek, this is for you. Our general obligation debt, it's almost absurd to think that we have legal authority to borrow up to over $1 billion based on our equalized value. They have a formula. Even though that's the level of authority, the professional standard would be much lower than that. But as the foreshadowing was, our actual debt is zero. I went to try and verify that today. It's hard to, can't call all other 71 counties, but when I found the DOR's most recent report, and they continued to list us as the only one that didn't have any debt. The Wisconsin Counties Association, similarly, their most recent published data indicates that there aren't any other counties that don't have any debt. I love taking credit for that, but I can't. Because that was the status when I got here, but it's a clear charge of each of the county boards I've worked with that that's to continue. And we've spent a lot of time doing that. And one of the things that I've sort of announced this year is that the county's starting a 10-year capital improvement plan instead of just a 5. They've always had just a 5-year. But we have some things, a couple of which I've listed there, some of our bigger projects that really require that we keep that longer term focus. 2 years ago when I did a budget, I spent a lot of time sort of evaluating our funding for highways because we were looking at a number of capital projects and there was a concern that if we did these things now, would we remain able to stay debt-free in the future? So we laid out a new funding strategy where over 10 years we build up to the annual level we needed to maintain for highway construction and show we could do that through 2035 without need of debt. And yesterday at our Public Works Committee, the bottom thing on that list, I'm calling the Government Center project, they received a report for the first time that said, we're getting to that juncture in the next few years where the maintenance requirements for the existing government center have the potential to exceed the cost of just building a new building. And we're not talking $1 million or $2 million. Having to replace that or repair that is a $25 million project, probably at minimum. You know, it'll be a 70-year-old building when we get to around 2035. So when we get to 2035, 2037, somewhere in there, we have to know we've got that money to stay debt-free. And so converting to a 10-year CIP, which we're doing for the first time, we're in the process of it right now, is one of the ways we can ensure that that condition stays the way. So we've done a number of things. When I first started, they were starting the radio communications project. The last tower for that new system is being installed this week in Lake Geneva. And so they are on time to be able to have that fully tested before the leaves fall off the tree in the fall, which is an important time because believe it or not, the leaves on trees impacts the public safety radio system and the how well it works for officers. And this system is covering all of public safety in the county. So, but it was a big project. We fit that in. It looks like that will come in actually about as much as $4 million under budget. So that just helps the balance for these other things going forward. But I think that is another step that shows we're continuing to keep the state of the county in a position to move forward in a very solid manner. Just very quickly, I want to cover this because I spent a lot of my conversation this time last year talking about state supplemental shared revenue. That is something that the state approved. It was a major change in state shared revenue. We got about $1.2 million increase in our shared revenue because of that. And I talked about that we would be getting that. This is a slide that actually comes right from the budget presentation I gave the county board for this year. And I thought it'd be at least good for a quick follow-up on where did we end up putting that. At the bottom of that slide, you can see that most of it we did apply to the sheriff's office. The courts got about 100,000, transportation, which I'll talk about, got about 100,000, and highway and road construction, about 150. And by putting that to that, that's not like once you apply that, it's staying in those areas going forward. So that 150, over 10 years is going to be another $1.5 million, another mile and a half of road done somewhere. It helps keep that highway plan that we're trying to develop, improve that for us. It made my annual need for adding levy to it, the plan we came up with 2 years ago, it reduced that a little bit, so it made every future budget a little bit easier. I'll talk briefly about the sheriff since they got the bulk of it. We're able to do some things that I think are really important. The county board thought so too. They put these all in. Some personnel are a civilian manager was put in place to run the communication center, which is dispatch on a day-to-day basis, along with a communications training and quality assurance manager. Obviously, I don't think I have to tell people how important dispatch is, but these positions, we're hoping and anticipating that they will help with our retention because we can continue to improve the environment up there. The better those people are trained, the more comfortable they are in the positions handling a very stressful job. So we've put a lot of resources there. I think the 2 lieutenants are worth noting. The sheriff's office hasn't had second and third shift lieutenant, command staff level in the past. Now 2 doesn't fill a chair 24 hours a day, actually two shifts a day, 7 days a week. But it is a start, and it sort of through certain peak periods we're able to work schedules out such that it works very well for them. And that gives them a command staff person that not only can oversee dispatch, but patrol, which is important for the officers at night on the road, but also the jail operation. So there's a senior member of command staff available to those shifts when there hadn't been. I don't need to go through all of that, but I did want you to see where the bulk of it would be. I do want to talk a little bit about housing. I'm not going to go into a lot of what Derek's going to cover, but just after the presentation last year in June, in July I gave a presentation on housing, an informational presentation to the county board that was part of their strategic planning session. And based on that and on some work WCEDA had done with a proposal they gave us, the county board did approve a contract with WCEDA for a special workforce housing initiative that's been going on since last fall, and that's the piece Derek will talk about, what they've been working on. We're using ARPA funding for that, and that's moving along. But the question really arose, what are we doing after that? If housing hit our strategic plan, we've got WCEDA working on it, are we going to get their sort of report that their contract says, oh, give us this study, tell us what you did, and are we just going to put it on a shelf and say, well, there you go? So the county board and the executive committee took some time and asked me to come back with some suggestions. And what they've decided to do is we've created a workforce housing strategic task force. So it's a short-term group, so it's not a group that's meant to be around a long time, but just to look at what other counties are doing and look at the issue of housing and try to position us for what should the county do after this current contract with WCEDA ends if they want to stay engaged in housing. The county board has said they want to stay engaged in housing. It's probably one of the most significant issues facing the county in how it moves forward, sort of from an economic development standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint. And So we've got a group, they've had their first meetings and they're forming. The group has 3 county board supervisors, excuse me, but it also has representative from local government, elected local government. There's a city council member from Whitewater. We have a developer, we have a civil engineer on the sort of the construction side and design and the infrastructure. So we've got all the different components there just to try to give us an idea where to go next. So the county intends to stay engaged in housing, and the goal that they've been given, you can see there at the bottom, to identify and develop recommendations for a structure and/or action steps for the county to continue to engage in workforce housing promotion following WCEDA's current workload. So when I've been talking with the county board about housing, I've really been talking about sort of a 3-legged stool. There's housing, there's transportation, and there's economic development in my mind. Those sort of build that foundation to create some stability for the county's whole economic arena to sort of move forward. And I think that transportation has been, I don't want to say it's been overlooked, because it hasn't. The county just started its program in 2017. And then the pandemic happened there in the middle, which had an impact that you'll see here in a second. But the reason that I recommended and the county board put that $100,000 of shared revenue toward transportation is to be able to consider either expanding the service hours or just trying to help ensure we could continue to fund them. In addition to that, we've got the program for our shared ride is called the wall-to-wall dial-a-ride, where you can call a day ahead and schedule to be picked up and dropped off essentially anywhere in the county during the hours of operation. Not everyone is aware of that, but we're trying to position ourselves to come out and begin to market it a little more strongly as we sort of finalize what our hours are. That rebranding is in process. We have an RFP for a marketing consultant on the street right now. We have a new contract for a service provider for 3 years, so we have some stability on the rate side. We know what that's going to be. And we have rising demand. This is our demand. Obviously, you can't read the numbers at the bottom there, but that's 2018 through 2024. When I was hired, it was right around that beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic. And my predecessor, who I was shadowing for that first meeting, was asking the county board to approve a resolution that added $200,000 of our funding to help meet that peak that was coming that nobody anticipated. The reason that's important is if you can plan this ahead of time, you get federal funds that comes to the state and they pay for a little over half, right? This coming year we get about 54%. If you miss that mark, you end up having to fill that all yourself. You can see that since the pandemic, we're back on that same trajectory. There's only a couple programs that are, there's only like 7 county programs, most of them are municipal. Ozaki and Washington counties are sort of the closest to ours. And if you look at a per capita basis, that line will likely keep going for probably another as much as 30%. There's the potential on it from a per capita side. Some of that will depend on hours of operation and what people are using it for. I put this in there just really quickly. You can see this, the table shows you about 35% now are using it for employment. That's very different than it was when we started it in 2017 and 18. So it's becoming more important in that economic development arena. There's about a quarter of them for medical purposes, about 20% or so for education, and then the recreation or personal is about another 20%, and then you have some smaller categories there that could probably group into one of those other bigger categories above. At the bottom, I think it's worth noting, the reason I recommended adding the money, and I talk about hours of service. You can see ours, 6 a.m., 7 p.m. Monday through Friday and Saturday, 7 to 5:30. But if you compare us to those, the 18 bigger programs, which is what the state does, there's 2 categories, and we fall into one of them. So there's 18 groups in the larger categories. 10 of them start earlier than we do every day. 16 of them run later than we do. You know, if you're trying to use this because you don't have a car and you need it to get to a job, you can only have that job till 7 p.m. and still be able to get a ride with the service that we have. 13 start earlier on Saturday, 17 and later on Saturday. And we're the only one that doesn't have a Sunday. Now, does that mean we have to change? No. Everybody has different hours, and you know, we have to evaluate what we can afford to fund, not just what we would love to be able to fund. Some of these services run 24 hours a day. But what it tells us is we have an issue to continue to work on. And so just a couple things that I wanted to mention a little bit about as sort of wrapping up here, because every year I've given this, I've spent a lot of time talking about what we're doing with ARPA funding. Finance Committee is going to get this on Thursday at 10 o'clock, going to get an update on some steps we're looking to wrap it up. What I just want to say is we anticipated the federal government would be fairly strict in how they closed out the program. We knew you had to have everything contracted for by the end of this year, spent by the end of 2026. And so we sort of built in some fallback areas. The radio project, for example, was bid out with all of the federal requirements included. So if we have even $1 left from any of our other programs, we can just move it over to the radio project so we don't have to give any back. But they actually, in the last few months, we found out they've come out with their closeout rules, and they're very favorable. In that, as long as you have a contract that says you can sort of amend that contract later, we can make changes later. If one of those projects, even after the end of this year, has money left, as long as it's a valid project that was already in the works, you can move the money over there. Gives us a lot more flexibility to continue to handle some of the things that we're funding through the ARPA funding. The Finance Committee is going to start talking about that Thursday. Our Fire EMS Study Committee, I know that's a hot button issue for a lot of the local governments. The county doesn't have a lot of direct engagement there. But where our engagement is right now is we've been asked by the towns and villages to engage a group. So we have a group of fire chiefs that are appointed to this, and in July is when the consultant comes in and they start to do work to sort of do an initial sort of county-wide review of the status of that. Broadband, I didn't spend much time on today. The real opportunities that were sort of straightforward, we had some success in under ARPA. That's fading away, and the state is fading into BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. It's a big federal program, and when I say big, I mean very big. The state share alone is about $1 billion over the next 6 years. But they're really trying to figure out how to do it, and they've made it challenging to be able to engage, and they want counties really participating, and they've given us no authority to really do anything. So it's made it challenging to figure out a real structure going forward, but that'll be something that we need to take the rest of this year and figure out just where they are. Now that some things have settled down in their end, hopefully we can hop on this train as it comes by. And then if we're talking about the state of the county, I probably can't leave out sales tax. I usually reference it every year. Last year was a banner year. We exceeded $15 million in collections, which has been very helpful to the county budget. And this year it looked like it was sort of dialing back. Both January and February came in lower than last year's January and February. But then March was out of bounds. 1.4 million in collections just in March, which was about a 30% increase over last year. Turns out you could probably calculate that because there were 5 weekends that fell in March this year. So, you know, that's a big jump, so we'll probably see April come in a little bit lower. But it looks like we're tracking right along to have that same sort of response. So that's a quick review of the county in a nutshell. Some of the things we're working on in the future, some of the projects coming up, but also I think importantly those things I led off with, which was what we do on a daily basis to try to make sure we're managing the county right and that we're getting that independent review and we're stopping to think about how we run our business. So with that, I think, Derek, you want me to ask, is there any questions for me?
Yeah. Open it up for questions.
Yes.
What's the trend on assessed value in the county?
The numbers I've seen, they've been going up considerably, but from the county level, we don't focus a lot on the assessed value. Most of that's happening at the local level. You're paying a lot more in property taxes to your municipality than in your school district than you are to the county. As a public administrator, the assessed value isn't the biggest piece of the taxes. It's what we're collecting in taxes. The assessed value just decides how we cut that pie of the tax dollar we're collecting up. You get your proportional share. So whether your assessed value's 100 or 100,000, as long as everybody's proportional to you, it gives me the numerator and the denominator to decide how much of the total property tax bill an individual has to pay. We spend at the county much more time talking about what is that total collection. So I haven't really seen the exact numbers on how that's driving. That's more of an issue on the housing market side, where can a person with a decent paying job make that a living wage, because you know the comparison between your income and the cost of a house isn't what it was 30 years ago. So we'll let Derek talk about that if he wants on the housing side. How's that? Any other questions I can pass off? No. Any other questions for me? Yes.
Just a comment and a question. With respect to property taxes, Gateway, of course, pays more, the majority share, or excuse me, Walworth County pays the majority share of taxes for Gateway Technical College, which I believe is a significant resource for our community, but we receive the least amount of services for a living reasons. I would just like to see more pressure from Derek Dioria and the county towards Gateway to draw more of that into our communities for more services. So that's the statement piece and the education piece for everybody. But question, who is the developer that's on the housing project or the housing committee?
John Tracy from the Tracy Group. Yeah, but on the gateway issue, that is something that we're trying to get a little bit more engaged in. For the last 2 years, I've represented the county on the board that appoints the trustees, and we were able through this year to be able to keep the high school superintendent representative as the Walworth County representative. The rules that they usually apply suggested that should transition back to Kenosha or Racine, and I was able to show sort of a 20-year history and say, we got left out so much in the last 20 years, we need to be able to double up. And so we got another 3-year appointment for Jason Tadlock here, the Elkhorn administrator. So that does give us that extra sort of representative. Obviously, they're all represented everywhere. But the board has done some good work, and they've got some nursing programs that are going to be starting, CNA, and some other things that they're developing at the Walworth County group. And so what I've been doing in this last year is trying to engage more with Dr. Raju there to make sure that they remember at their executive levels that Walworth County is that big part of them. And it's a great question from Jesse.
You have your newest trustee starting next month sitting in the room here with you, Preston Gardner.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do there, trying to get our toes in the door a little further. Any additional questions? Seeing none, well, thank you very much for your time.
All right, well, thank you, Mark. Really appreciate that. Even though I stay in close touch with you, it's always good. I always learn more things about what you're doing. And like I said initially, I think that our county does such a great job managing the finances. It really helps when we're talking with potential companies to locate here to be able to share some of this information. So, so with that, the next speaker I'd love to introduce, and he's no stranger here, appreciate Tom Walsh. He is labor economist at the Department of Workforce Development. He sits in almost always on the Southeast Workforce Development Board meetings, which typically are every other month or quarterly, and just really usually has a good perspective on what's happening here in the state and then particularly in our region. So with that, I'd like to invite Tom up to the podium.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And as the economist, I do have to put a metric to being no stranger, and it is year 6 for coming here, which also marks the longest I've been in any single job. So that it was honestly a little bit interesting to look back at from year to year, kind of what I've gone over, and realize it's like, oh, I actually went over. I've been in my current role longer than I was at Milwaukee Area Tech, which I was there about 5 years. So that was kind of fun to see, and I'm happy to be here. So a little bit of what I'm going to talk about is really very quickly where we are now, some of the challenges we're facing in the future, and then probably way more importantly, what are some of the high-level things that we can do that would be actionable to actually help us overcome some of those challenges we have going forward. So first of all, looking at unemployment rates. Summing up this graph here, unemployment rates are historically low. Unemployment rate in Walworth County, most recent number was 2.9%, 3% for the state. And biggest takeaway, the two areas have largely followed the same trend. So what we have a low unemployment rate, we call that a tight labor market, and trying to get a sense of how tight is pretty difficult. A lot of times we do have to rely a fair amount on the anecdotes and kind of what employers are seeing on the ground level. One thing that can help is looking at the split between job openings and hires. If this graph went out a little bit further, or I should say a little back a little bit further, you would see that line between the blue hires and the orange job openings actually be more in favor of the hires. As we've gone forward, that gap closed, and the gap between hires and job openings kind of closed further and further, to the point where we actually have more openings than hires on a regular basis. And so looking at that split can give us some sense of how tight the labor market is at the moment. And the best way I can put it is it seems to have subsided a little bit from where it was a year or two ago, but it's still a pretty big difference between the two. And that really does kind of fall in line with what I'm hearing more from the individuals and those individual anecdotes of how of how much trouble people are having finding talent and how much how much trouble companies are having finding workers. Going into what we're going to see in the future, and really going over the reasons why this tight labor market is not going away. It largely comes down to an aging population. So the graph here is the projected population compared to the projected labor force. I say projected. A lot of this graph has actually already happened, and we're already seeing this flat labor supply compared to a growing population. And that's driven by aging baby boomers. And to put a little bit of a reference to that, in 2010, approximately 1 in 7 people in Wisconsin were over the age of 65. We're currently at about 1 in 5. 2040, we're looking at around 1 in 4 residents being over the age of 65 in Wisconsin. So along with that aging population, we've seen a decline in labor force participation rates. So again, this is a graph that's highly tied to age, because the labor force participation within age groups has remained somewhat steady. Actually, over the last 20-25 years, there's been a pretty decent increase in the labor force participation rate among people that are over the age of 65. But that's as you would expect. That's already a group that is much deservingly lower in terms of the participation rates and moving into their well-earned retirement years. So what we've seen is very steady to maybe slightly declining labor force participation rate among the prime working age years of 25 to 54. We've actually seen an increase in those older age groups, but that's a good piece of the puzzle. And in terms of the labor market challenges and finding work and keeping that talent within the labor market is tremendously valuable. But you really can't expect that forever. Expect that to be your primary draw for where you're getting workers. And just to summing that up, this is what our chief economist at DWD, Dennis Winters, the way he always puts it is that we're facing a quantity shortage for workers. I think you could take that maybe even a little bit one step further and say that we're currently in a quantity shortage for workers, and that we're moving forward, we're still facing the same challenges. So going more into the actionable and what are some of the things that we can do about it, there's really no silver bullet. But we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that could help bring more people into the labor market, both for the area and overall. So first of all, commuting slide up here. So looking at Walworth County in terms of the net commuting balance. One opportunity here is that there is currently a negative number between the number of people that come from outside of Walworth County to work in the area versus the number of people that live in Walworth County but commute elsewhere for employment. You could call it commuting partners, is largely tied to the region, the contiguous counties, as you would expect, and it's somewhat scattered. So there's definitely a difference in the numbers, but it's not like this gigantic number of all the workers that are leaving the county are going to this other additional county. To make sure to kind of cover it from a little more thoroughly, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have someone that lives in the county but works elsewhere, because that is someone that lives here, maybe owns a house here, as part of the tax base, it's a sales tax, but in terms of a workforce perspective and looking for workers, could be a potential opportunity of having more people stay within the county and working within the county's businesses. Along with that, bringing more people into the county is another way of improving that labor market outlook and improving that quantity shortage, which really largely boils down into making this a great place to live and work, and hopefully be able to get some additional migration. That said, the rest of the state and the rest of the country are really facing these same challenges, so they're kind of going to be doing similar initiatives working the same things, but it becomes a piece of the puzzle, and it should kind of be in the mind of of how do we help with these labor market challenges, and there are some opportunities here. So next, we like to highlight underutilized talent. So these aren't necessarily the only 4 categories, or not necessarily even the largest 4 categories, but a good way of looking at it is if you break it up into buckets of talent pools that have traditionally been underutilized, you can see veterans, individuals with disabilities, the justice involved, and then the one that I have bolded and the one that I'm going to spend a little more time talking about is those underskilled or currently unemployed or currently out of the labor market. So now more than ever, it becomes increasingly important to try and tap into these underutilized pools to help ease that quantity shortage that we're facing and currently experiencing. So looking at that underutilized or the currently unemployed or currently out of the labor market group, some of the reasons that so looking at the barriers and the reasons that they are currently out of the labor market or currently underemployed is looking at are up here with the employment barriers. Again, not the only barriers. These vary widely from individual to individual, but the 4 on the screen here are what we typically see regardless of the area or regardless of the industry, and they are childcare, transportation, housing, and broadband. So start a little bit with childcare. So childcare barrier on 2 different levels. So first of all, difficult to access and difficult to find those childcare slots. And then secondly, it is very expensive. So just a reference point to throw out there. The median if you take the median wage for a machinist, for a full-time machinist in Walworth County, about 1/3 of it would go to childcare for a single child, if they needed to find full-time childcare. So very big chunk of an income would have to go to that cost if you're trying to cover childcare purely through a provider. And then secondly, again, even if you have the resources to afford it, finding access is difficult across the state. We don't have great metrics on that. We highlight some within our county profiles, which are on our Wisconsin webpage for the Department of Workforce Development. I'm just trying to look at a little bit of the population density and the total available childcare slots from the database that we do have. Walworth County does fall below the state average in terms of that access metric, which which is imperfect, but is a good kind of talking point to say that it is difficult to find access. Secondly, and I guess the final point on with childcare. So one of the takeaways I like to throw out there, especially when I'm working with business services groups, is that if you're within an organization that is doing something, that is doing things about childcare or trying to either provide access, or are you doing things within your scheduling to make it more available for your workers or more accessible or more convenient for your workers to balance their childcare responsibilities with work, make a point of highlighting that, because it's something that your potential workers are looking for, and being able to ease that burden or at least ease their minds in saying that you're a company that understands this challenge can be an important piece in trying to bring more people into your organization. So when I say secondly, I put them together just as we mentioned, the 3-legged stool and 2 of those legs were housing and transportation. So going into those, first of all, housing, and just to kind of piggyback on that comment about trying to get to the level where it becomes affordable with workforce wages. You might have seen me frantically go into my computer and trying to go that and just kind of look up a little bit of a metric. And what I was looking at is the percentage of renters versus homeowners that spend 30% or more of their income on housing, so either their rent or their mortgage. And in Walworth County, it's 42% of renters spend more than 30% of their income on their rent, compared to about 25% of homeowners. So even if you look at that headline number of which is more expensive from a dollar standpoint, while the owning is more expensive from a dollar typically with the where housing values are, if you look at the percentage of incomes that those groups are actually spending on rent versus own, the renters are actually spending a larger percent of their income on housing. And then we piggyback that together with having expenses for childcare. It does add up pretty quickly in terms of trying to kind of cover expenses and such. So secondly, again, coming together with the transportation. Without getting too much into it or going into too much depth, overall what we see in Wisconsin is that the workforce primarily relies on cars as their mode of transportation to get to work. So there's some variations within counties, but Walworth County is no exception to that. You're primarily looking at workers using a car to get to work. So there's some opportunities to improve that, but that's more of the reality. And then the way I like to describe that is that the conundrum you're left with is that you have companies that can provide jobs that would make a car affordable for the individuals, but they need to bridge that gap to the point where they're in the job long enough to actually afford that car. That's again not the universal scenario where everyone is forcing or everyone is facing, but that's essentially a good way of summarizing how is transportation a barrier in terms of getting people to be more fully employed, and being able to get over that gap to where they're in a job long enough to get that transportation covered is really important, and really goes in really lines up with a lot of what the county is doing, and what we highlighted previously. And then finally, broadband. So broadband, where it becomes a barrier is last foot and last mile. So last mile is not having the physical infrastructure for broadband. Last foot is having the physical infrastructure for broadband, but having individuals that don't have it in their households. Largely, that last foot scenario comes down to income. And when you look at when you break down households that don't have access to internet, it falls onto household income, and having the higher shares of the lower income households not having access to internet than households with higher incomes. So why is that a workforce barrier? A couple levels. First of all, what we've seen over the last few years is an increase in remote working opportunities, which are tremendous. So whether it be hybrid schedules or fully remote, we've seen that increase. But if you're a household that doesn't have that capability, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And then secondly, and maybe a little more, maybe possibly, arguably more importantly, we've seen this. You have more and more potential for virtual training opportunities and upskilling through virtual options that can provide a great level of convenience or extra convenience. But if you're a household that doesn't have broadband in the home, you can't take advantage of any of those opportunities. So this one is if you had to kind of rate the barriers in terms of which one of these things is not like the other, the broadband is probably a little bit different and maybe not quite as prominent, but I would argue that it's becoming increasingly more important. And so being able to address it and continuing to address it is really important from a workforce perspective. And then so finally, in terms of what we can do about it, what things are actionable, is really the great unknown with technology. So technology does play an important role in trying to take on these quantity shortages, but exactly how is really difficult to explain. So the graph I have here is automation and artificial intelligence. The bigger point I'm trying to make is that that whether it's artificial intelligence or automation, pretty much all the sectors of the economy are susceptible to one, the other, or both. So again, what that means, I really can't say. I'm not exactly sure how to put that into perspective of or numerically what kind of an impact it's going to have. But the biggest thing we can say is that it will have a large impact, particularly the artificial intelligence, and that in more broader terms, when you're looking at technology, advances in technology, you should view it more as replacing tasks, not people. So the technology can't take over everything, but what you can look at it is taking over some of the tasks that it can, and then you free up more time for your talent, more time for your workforce to take on the tasks that can't be replaced by the technology. That's a very high level way of putting at it, and the reality really kind of comes down to how it's used. But I think it is an important point to make that it kind of play nicely together and play hand in hand with quantity shortages to try and ease some of those quantity shortages by more fully utilizing the people that we do have. And so that comes down to really going over it again. We're in a tight labor market. I don't see that going away. And then hopefully highlighting some of the things that we can do about it is somewhat of a positive way of putting it. That said, there's not going to be a single silver bullet. So to think that, hey, if we just do more of this, we're going to ease all these workforce challenges, really isn't the best way to look at it. It really has to be a pretty holistic solution in terms of how to bring a lot of different things together and take on some of the challenges that we're facing. And time for questions?
Yeah. No,
Yep. So I can take any questions if there are any.
Any surveys done on the out commuters, on your net out commuter slide, on what's driving that?
Um,
And any statements on trends there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So trends are a little bit difficult. So typically commuting patterns, the data we get is a little bit lagging. So we have a little trouble kind of coming up with like, hey, is it getting better or worse? In terms of the types of workers, there are some resources available, possibly being able to look at how that, like at what types, what income levels or what types of workers are going out versus what types of workers are coming in. We have a little more data, like for example, we have a little more data for Waukesha County versus Milwaukee County because of the larger population sizes, and there what we usually see is you have the more higher earnings, more professional jobs that go the what we consider the traditional direction from the more suburban Waukesha County to Milwaukee County versus the workers that come the opposite direction. I don't have those splits with me for Walworth County, and I'd be guessing that it wouldn't quite be as prominent, or you wouldn't see a huge pattern, but I'm not exactly sure what it would come up with.
How does remote work impact the net commuter?
It's largely speculation in terms of answering it, but the way I would speculate is that there's a few different things it could do. So one of them could be that it would widen the pool or widen the radius that you're willing to travel to work. If you're only going in a couple days of work versus a couple days a week versus 5 days a week, you could possibly kind of widen your radius, which has the potential of being a positive for Walworth County if people are look at more of having more land and space, but also being able to take a job a little further away. Beyond that, beyond that, it's kind of hard to say. And then I think like a lot of what we're seeing, it really hasn't shown up in the aggregate numbers yet. So a lot of what we see is you see a news story here and there about these workers in this age group are kind of taking on this type of job. That hasn't really shown up into the aggregate numbers yet to kind of make a firm assessment of what remote work means for the future. Although I will say the one kind of, again, it's somewhat anecdotal, but it was maybe a year and a half ago I was at a conference, and I don't recall the exact numbers, but it was something like that. But the example was that there was a company that posted a position. They got something like 60 applicants. Then they went back to their applicant pool and clarified that it was a 100% in-person job. It dropped to like 5. And it was something close to that. I usually my memory's pretty, but I can't remember exactly what the numbers are. But it was something kind of staggering where, like when they clarified that, yeah, no, this is 100% in person. That definitely was a driving factor in reducing their applicant pool.
data and just the population growth trends for our area that would affect workforce?
I'd have to go back a little bit to my kind of and look Walworth County specifically. It is, we are seeing an aging population. So overall trend, Walworth County, like the rest of the state, is seeing aging population. I don't have it with me in terms of how much of the population change is what we call the natural increase or decrease versus the net migration. It's pretty close to me on the computer, but not I can't remember right now. So.
We could follow up with that, Jesse, for the group. So I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good one.
Just
Yeah,
one.
Including
Oh,
Preston's question too, it'd be good to get that data.
okay, yeah, no, that would be. Just one thing, if you could comment on I guess the impact on in terms of childcare impact on the labor force participation for women, because I think sometimes that gets overlooked. A lot of times they carry that burden of that, and there's potentially a big,
Yeah, and I think
labor
that is,
pool that could be, if that were addressed.
and that definitely is a kind of more traditionally, it is a bigger impact on women than men. And along with that, I think just if you tie that into, okay, how do we utilize how do we more fully utilize different sectors of the population? One of those ways would be to look at easing that childcare burden and possibly just the reality being aimed a little bit more at women. Just spinning off into a little bit of a tangent that I forgot to mention, like when I look into the future, one of the things I do see is that childcare can probably be expanded to elderly care as well. So we look at an aging population and we look at what are some of the workforce barriers. That is one of the things I like to mention, that childcare is a little more tangible and the one that we focus on. We could probably throw elderly care into kind of that same general concept. But yes, it's so unrelated to that question, but my mind triggered on having forgot to say that.
Good, thank you.
What I'd like to do for the final section here is just update you a little bit on housing. Mark talked about it, we've talked about it 2 different times here at our State of the County about housing, and thankfully, like Mark said, we were able to put a proposal forward just after this event last year in July that they accepted, and so really just kind of wanted to run through a little bit on that, give a little bit of background first for some that either weren't aware of it, or maybe just a little bit of a reminder, and then a few data points to keep in mind, and then just some of the things that we're doing that we see as a positive development. So, real quickly, the background, here's what I'll talk about, as I said, real quickly, the background. Like I said, we talked a few different times about that. We were involved in a committee at the county level, which is they call it CHIP, the Community Housing Improvement Plan Committee, and that's really where a lot of this developed. And we worked closely with SNOPAC, which is the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, to develop a booklet that we have on our website. When we do a follow-up here, we'll have that booklet for you. It's a great guide, Walworth County specific data, about 12 pages, really useful, that we put together. And then we started with our initiative, which we'll talk about, and some of the goals and things like that. So I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. This, I think, just always hits you, and it's something everybody remembers when we hit this graph here. You can't see the lines here, but the blue is really subdivision plats. Single-family permits is the red, and then the greenish color there is multifamily. But it shows you, when we hit the Great Recession there, and really what happened, and it can just show that it's really never come back. It's coming back a little bit, but not much. And, you know, this is just a little bit more, you know, to kind of show you there. But the lots were, excuse me, what we're finding now is just don't have a lot of platted lots to build on. Things really haven't come back. Permits are still lagging. And so it's not something that I'm sure is surprising to you, but just kind of wanted to reiterate that. So we know there's a shortage statewide, right? They're saying 200,000 that by 2030. And then in Walworth County specifically, they're predicting by 2030 that we'll be about 4,600 units short. So single family, multifamily, it's a mix, but pretty significant really for a small county to be estimated that short. I just put this slide up because you could see a little bit of comparison with some of the other counties. Again, you can see where they're at in terms of shortages and things like that. And then, you know, this slide here kind of shows just the growth and the change overall, what's slowing down. You can see that the 1 person, 2 person, we're having an increase there and in that area, but with smaller households, so creating more of a demand for smaller households. You know, reason for this, you can just kind of see in the age there, but obviously having less children, you can see in the older age brackets there an increase. So, you know, just again, just probably not something that would surprise you, but wanted you to keep that in mind. And then when we get into specifics here, you can see, again, not a big surprise, but really low vacancy rates among, especially the homeowner, but then rental as well, very low. Some of our communities here, again, this is in our booklet that was developed through SERPAC, so you can get more data on that, but just some of the communities that were highlighted here that gave us some, you know, I guess, a way to communicate with some of these other communities here. As we know, rising costs really been a big barrier here. So I just included this quickly to show, you know, how significant the increase has been in the last, in this case, 3 years. Walworth County, one of the highest here, you know, $90,000 increase in the median from 19 to 22 there. So just really staggering. Mortgage rate rising. Thought this was an interesting slide just to keep in mind as you think about it as it goes, you know, from year to year, and you can see some of the numbers here, but the increase in interest rate, how that impacts, and then when you get down to the annual income needed, it jumps significantly just in a couple of years on what's needed, and just making it so much more difficult to afford home ownership. So again, a lot of this stuff's not a big surprise. I know, Tom, you talked about this slide here in terms of 30%, but that's kind of a number that we use when we're thinking about, you know, particularly workforce housing. And I should back up to say one of the reasons we focused on workforce housing and calling it that was because, you know, we're looking at, there's different types of housing, right? It could be for homeless, could be subsidized, could be for senior care, and we really, as an economic development agency, wanted to focus on what we were calling the workforce, but that really spans across the spectrum, but really what we're talking about is our teachers, our production workers, our hospitality workers, our firefighters, you know, across the board, really kind of the core group of workers that keep things running, and that's what we're trying to focus on. And that group, you know, is supposed to pay about 30% of their income, disposable income, on housing, but as we're seeing, that's even pushing beyond that, making it more difficult, but a lot of households that are impacted here. So again, just kind of wanted to keep some of these at the forefront here of you in terms of why we think this is so important and why we want to continue with this effort. We'll have these slides available for people if any of these are of interest to you. Almost there. Again, these are some of the ones I just mentioned, but it gives you an idea on some of the hourly rates and how those play out, and really where we're trying to focus our effort on trying to get enough housing for people in these categories and some of the jobs that I mentioned earlier. Just lastly here, you know, we do have a good workforce participation, almost 70% in the labor force here, but you can just see how that's a little bit above the national average. College graduate, a little bit below, and then you know, we're a little bit above in terms of aging, and I know that's really going to continue going forward. So this slide I thought was good because Mark had referenced this in when you did a presentation and to the county about housing. Washington County is probably the most progressive in the state in terms of housing and what they're doing for workforce housing. And they kind of set this structure in place, and it's something that, that we've essentially kind of adopted this strategy where we're working with developers, looking at zoning, trying to educate, helping pull together some resources in terms of ownership resources, and then public outreach. And so I just thought that was helpful. And just want to talk about then some of the things that we're doing. And really, you know, I should at this point introduce Pam Carper, because she's the face of what we're doing. Pam, is she here? Yeah, if you could stand up. So Pam Carper, some of you have met her, but if not, hopefully you will. She's been really working closely and doing more work than I have, honestly, with this. But Pam's been a great asset, and a lot of what we're talking here, we can credit to her. So Pam, thanks for your work, and hopefully we'll continue with that. So one of the things that we've heard as we talked with the municipalities is, you know, we don't even know, we don't know, we don't have a connection with developers that are interested to do workforce housing. So one of the things we did with Whitewater was we tried to connect them with some developers, one of which was U.S. Shelters, and they're starting to do a duplex project there now. Certainly not what I would say cheap or affordable, but it's about as affordable right now as we're seeing. But we're getting new housing going there. We're working with a number of different developers. A lot of them are wanting to be anonymous at this point, just so that they don't, you know, before they get going here, they don't have any public pushback on some things. But working with another developer that's really interested to do a mixed-use development that would incorporate commercial, potentially light industrial, but also potentially like dormitory-style housing, small unit workforce housing. So hopeful that that would go forward. Working with another employer who would like to do some workforce housing on a property that they own. Another builder that's looking at 2 different communities for smaller 30 to 40 unit. These would be more single family homes, so I'm hoping to get that going with some of the communities. You know, did a presentation to East Troy there, and that was really interesting because what they did was a joint meeting with their plan commission and all the village board members, and really just went through a lot of the information that we had presented. They pulled some information that Mark had pulled together for his presentation at the county, and just really laid it all out there. And they were very surprised to kind of see the numbers, think about the numbers, and were very receptive to, hey, what can we do? And so, reason I'm bringing this up, and it's certainly just in the starting stages, but they, as a board, had kind of taken charge of some property to develop in a industrial, new industrial park there. And, you know, put that together, worked with the developer, got some things going. It turned out to be a successful project, and they said, you know, maybe we ought to look at some property and see if we can potentially do that same model, but do that with housing. And not saying they're doing that, but just the fact that they're talking about that, thinking about that, I think is part of what we're trying to do, is get with these communities, help them get the information that they need, potentially, you know, share resources with what other counties are doing, like Washington County. Jefferson County's another one just north of Whitewater that's been pretty aggressive with their housing. And so Pam and I have met a number of times with their economic development office that's really leading that charge in housing, sharing information, trying to, you know, use some best practices. But feel like we're getting really getting some good reception in a number of our communities, helping them start to think through and do a plan. And so just a few other ones here you can see as we meet with the different communities, made some presentations, exploring something that's been interesting in some of these communities is they're creating land trusts. And so they're able to let's say, take a piece of property, create a land trust, put some deed restrictions in, figure out how to do some funding to keep the costs down, and you know, use that as a tool to have almost a workforce housing in place that will be there for a long time. And so just looking at those different types of options, would they work? Are our communities receptive to that? But what I would say is, really, what we're trying to do is, what we told the county we would try to do is meet with 4 of our communities that are ready to, they're interested, they know there's a problem, they have resources that they're willing to activate. Get with those communities, try to see what we can do to facilitate some movement in housing, then work with another 4 or 5 communities to say, okay, let's look at your comprehensive plan. What does it say about housing? What can we do to put some action steps together and help you move that forward? And so those are the 2 main goals. There's certainly you know, other things that we're putting together, like resource pages and things like that. But that's ultimately what we're hoping to do by the end of this, which, as Mark said, it was a 12-month proposal, would end September 30th potentially. But as he also said, there's a task force, an interim task force that was put together to kind of evaluate what we're doing now, where we want to go. We're hoping that we'll be able to extend this in some way. We feel that it's very important, so we'll try to be a part of that in any way that we can. I should mention we have Brian Holt here, who is, if you could just raise your hand. Brian is county board supervisor, one of Mark's bosses. He's been very active in this whole housing way back, starting with the CHIP process. Very committed to that. He's on the task force as well. Feel like we've got a lot of good things going. I would say with Washington County, I think they're in about year 4, and I think this is really their first project that they have going, and is it called Jackson Creek, I think. But so the fact that we've got Whitewater already starting with something, and a few of these other communities and builders looking at that within less than a year, I feel like we've made some good progress. But we definitely want to you know, keep that moving, keep finding resources that we can bring to the different communities. You know, we're looking at some of the school districts. I know we're looking at some of their older buildings, and okay, do we need these for, you know, for teaching, or is it at a point where we maybe try to convert that into housing? You know, how can we be innovative, creative, look at older buildings to do some conversions? You know, just really educate the public. I think there's a survey here on, well, so this is what we're doing. You'll see some of these types of flyers that we're posting in public areas, pushing it out on social media and our website just to educate people about that. Trying to get more surveys in place, so just simple survey, but trying to find out from employers, what are you seeing around housing? How is that potentially impacting you? What we're hearing is that it's not necessarily impacting at the moment, but as they're trying to hire new people, sometimes people won't take the jobs because they're saying they can't find affordable housing, and we're hearing more and more of that. So I think when we get the rest of the surveys in, we'll hear more of that. You know, some of the things that they can do that we're trying to talk, a lot of what can be done is around zoning. And so you'll get pushback on that, but really if there are different districts or areas in a community that might be suitable for denser developments, so smaller lot sizes, smaller structure sizes, that's going to be a way that we can help bring more affordable housing without even any resources. But then, you know, probably one of the biggest tools a lot of people have heard about, but is tax incremental financing. Sometimes that gets a lot of pushback from communities that don't understand how that works. But so we'll be trying to educate people on how that works and how we can leverage that tool a little bit more. Let's see, probably one thing to note is I'm glad the state has grabbed onto this. So there's a number of different bills that passed in the last year that will help with some potential funding for workforce housing projects in particular. So we'll see how that goes. We haven't had that many utilize some of that funding yet, but I think part of that is the education process and trying to figure out how to navigate some of the guidelines. We've been helping with that, and we'll continue to promote some of the tools that are available through the state and really work with some of the legislators to hopefully make that a little bit more user-friendly. And then just, you know, these are obvious things, I think, but just to reiterate why we're doing this, why it's so important. In the next 5 years, probably, if we don't do anything about this, some of these things could be really significant. So I'm really excited that we've got an initiative going. We've got more momentum, hoping that we can continue to build on that momentum. But you know, at the end of the day, it's really going to impact what we can do with our employers in terms of job growth. So I think it's really important. And you know, sometimes you say, well, what does that look like? We threw this in. This is a company that does workforce housing. This is in Door County, but they're doing a lot in talking with Jefferson County about doing things, but can certainly make it look really nice. And these are duplexes, but doesn't have to look, you know, undesirable. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Again, you know, talked about that. Would love to hear your thoughts on workforce housing. If you have questions, whatever, please, you know, feel free to email Pam. But just wanted to give you a quick update on some of the things we're doing, some of the communities that are moving forward with some projects, and then ask you, open it up for questions here. If you have any questions about what we're doing, workforce housing, what certain communities are doing, tools, whatever. But oh, Tom, yeah.
The 0% interest loans that the state has authorized, are those issued to the local banks, or do municipalities have to apply on behalf of the developer?
You know, that's a good question. I think that they have to go through WCEDA, right? I think, yeah, through WCEDA, but they'd probably work with WCEDA and then a bank or whatever, but I'll...
And if it's WCEDA, are they tied to the tax credit workforce housing, or is it for all workforce development? Because they've got their own government time on it.
Sorry, Derek.
Yeah, go ahead,
We can
Denise, because
fix that.
Denise
Sorry,
is...
I don't know the answer, but we'll find it.
Yeah, yeah, we will, because I know some of that is still a little bit, we had Jeffrey Town, who would be probably a good one to connect you with from WCEDA. we had him do a presentation to the Lakeland Builders Association. And so I know there were still, they're still kind of fine tuning a bunch of that, but he's a good one to connect with if you want to
If I might.
get. Yeah.
Some of the WCEDA financing is being looked at. It's like, let's develop our financing here and let's develop our financing here, but the two parties don't talk. And so I could give you an answer to that question right now. It's probably going to change in a couple months as they realize that they need to be more open and so that different financing can blend. So like if you have a WCEDA loan, you can't have a TIF tax increment. They need to talk. And so I know that's going on where they are in the process.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, they allocated 525 million or whatever to it, so that's good, but it's not been activated that much. I think partly because people don't quite understand, what the guidelines are. They're a little.
It's a tax credit application that takes basically 2 years.
Well, and that's
There's a
you're
lag
right.
in it, but if you've got 0% loans that could be utilized for developers, we've got developers that would look at that.
Right.
Because that's a big weapon in the toolbox.
Yeah, and that's partly what we're trying to do is, get some of those answers and then start promoting that with the local developers. Oh, yeah, sure.
Have you guys discussed maybe changing the coin term workforce housing? I know, Derek, we've talked about this before, but a lot of local communities really struggle because everybody's not my backyard. Right?
Right.
Because the term workforce housing has this negative, connotation to it. It's like developers are now coming in with next gen housing or some type of coin term. It's affordable, but affordable is relative to the area. So affordable in Mugwanago is $300,000, right? That's low income housing in Mugwanago. So we want to try to make sure that we can offer various levels. But if you say workforce housing, I've got a governing body that's going to say no.
It's funny that you say that because initially we were looking at this proposal saying affordable housing and we're like, oh no, people advised us on workforce. That was a year ago. Now you're right. People are starting to say they want to refer to it more as next generation housing. So we probably will. I know some of the developers as they talk and present their plans to like the municipalities, they're just saying housing. They don't even want to go there with workforce. They're just saying, here's my housing plan.
Yeah.
Because you're right, people don't understand and they're pushing back. They're not understanding, who it's serving. So I think you're right. I think we will end up probably changing how we're going to be calling. But for now, it was, through workforce and it is serving, what we're trying to do is serve. But it's a good point. So. Well, I know we're over, but is there one last comment?
I was just going to say, from the Housing Alliance side, a big campaign's coming out, yes, in my backyard. That's all they're doing, is they're not going to use another new word there, so they're going to switch it to yes in my backyard, and here's why. So you'll see consumer messaging with that on it.
As we wind this up, I had a meeting with one of our municipalities, a second meeting, and I want to leave you with some thoughts. Everyone in this room represents a company, business, an association. Two things came out of that meeting. The municipality realized they needed housing. They were attracting businesses into their municipality and did not have housing for the 40-plus employees that were coming. By the same token, the business that was being attracted and planning to move in kept saying, where are my employees going to live? Get ahead of the game. Begin to think we need to do this, and don't get caught in this last minute, oh my gosh, I have to have housing, I'm going to have this business come in, and I'm going to see my economic platform and base grow in my community. So keep it in the forefront, talk about it, help move it forward, so we don't get caught having to run after and chase the game. Thank you.